Welcome back to the Robert E. Howard Foundation channel. We're doing a video on Robert E. Howard's funny Western character, Breckinridge Elkins. The two volumes of Breckinridge Elkins are available for order now from the Robert E. Howard Foundation website, press website, and also from Amazon. This is volume one, and this is volume two. And we will be talking mainly about volume one tonight. With me, making their return, are Mark Finn, one of our major experts on Breckinridge Elkins, and then Paul Herman, who's also an expert on Breckinridge Elkins and also edited the first edition and the ultimate edition of the two volumes of Breckinridge Elkins. So welcome back, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Let's go into a brief description of what's in volume one of Breckinridge Elkins. Would you like to take that, Mark?
I can, yes. The two volumes are broken rather handily into all of the original short stories that ran in action stories and in a couple of interesting places elsewhere. And then volume two is the complete reprint of A Gent from Bear Creek, which was published in 1937 by Herbert Jenkins in Great Britain.
The
And
novel.
the novel, and did not come back over here, did not arrive here until I want to say the 60s was when the first Grand Edition was published.
Yeah.
And so that's a pretty cool thing. But the short stories from Action Stories are all in volume one, and they are arranged chronologically, which actually kind of works out because he sort of wrote them the way they were published. There's not a lot of reconfiguring in there that I know of. And it's nice because these are some of, I don't want to say rare because that implies maybe a value. For a long time, these were just not available unless you owned the original pulps. In fact, Paul, you and I go back a ways. And this was your first big publishing project way back in the day. You collected the complete Action Stories into a really limited, was it 50 or 100 copies?
I think 100 copies.
100 copies from
Good
Herman.
luck to our fans finding that.
Yes, have a ball tracing that. But so that was nice. And Paul did that originally because these had never been available to people. I mean, people didn't know they were out there. At the time in the mid to late 90s, Conan was still casting a very wide shadow over everything else Robert E. Howard. I think sometimes to the detriment of all of his work. And so this represents a couple of things. First of all, this is a significant chunk of his writing that has not heretofore been factored into the overall equation of Robert E. Howard's body of work. And then second, it's making all of these available for study and also for enjoyment allows us to compare the stories with what made its way into A Gent from Bear Creek, the novel, and also what was original to the novel that wasn't in any of the stories. And I think it's imperative that you have all of this stuff, which is why the Foundation Press exists, to get the complete picture of Robert E. Howard. You can't understand Robert E. Howard from looking at a handful of Conan stories any more than you could understand me by looking at my high school graduation photograph. There's a lot more there than just, a hairline and chiseled good looks, and on either side of it. So I think it's really important, especially for people who are studying Howard textually or even biographically. I think you have to factor that stuff in to have an overall complete picture, because it's an aspect of his personality that only really shows up in one other place, but it accounts for the largest quantity of his writing, with both Breck and the boxing sailor Steve Costigan. His humor stuff is 1/3 of everything story wise that he wrote. You gotta account for that. So I'm really glad that these are first available and limited, and now in these forever editions. I'm pointing backwards at my book in case anybody is curious. And real quick, I just want to say I don't know who came up with the idea of doing just the Mark Wheatley artwork um, without any of the text on it for the wraps.
For the boards. Yeah.
But boy, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's so nice.
Yeah.
These are now my reference books because I can take the jacket off, and I know that first of all I can tell which one's which, but also I can hold it and I don't feel bad about manhandling it because you know it's available and it still looks good when you stack it up. So
that's right. And I'd throw in also, the second volume was where we also got a chance to write up to include all the Breck contemporaries that he wrote for other magazines because Breck was so successful, was hitting every issue of Action Stories that other magazine editors started calling him saying, we'd really like a character like that. He's like, I can write more stories like this. No problem. Yeah.
I don't think Jack Byrne gets enough credit for, first of all, kind of recognizing in him at Fiction House, first with the boxing stories and then later with Breck. I think he really saw the potential right away. And it's obvious that they were fans of it. He wrote a letter to that effect. But then when Byrne moved on, he brought Howard with him. And it's a shame that we didn't see him a little bit further down that line because, boy, just think about the historical adventure stuff Howard could have written in Argosy,
Oh, yeah.
That would have been just amazing. So,
yeah. Just to add to the talk here, if I can get this in here.
Here you go.
That is, this is Action Stories. I think this is February of 36. So this is Pistol Politics. So down there at the very bottom says, including Robert E. Howard.
Need to raise it up
there.
Raise it up just a little bit higher on your camera. Higher.
There it
Perfect.
is.
There it is. And then and then the actual story on the inside. I'm gonna hurt myself. Here we go. This is what happens when I try and do three things with two hands. It just doesn't always work out. And then we have the actual contents.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, with the original little drawing they did
Love
for
that.
it. The interior artwork was always interesting. Pilgrims to the Pecos, excuse me, Pilgrims to the Pecos. Was that story. So anyway, that's what an original Action Story looked like. I have a couple of those. So it's nice to, just in case people were wondering what they look like, that's what they look like. So
yep.
All right. Well, for people who only know Robert E. Howard through his action heroes of Conan, Solomon Kane, King Kull, and El Borak, what is so different about Breckinridge Elkins?
Paul, you want to start?
Sure, I'll start that one. It's, I always tell people that when they say, well, who's Breckinridge Elkins? And I say, well, he's this gigantic hillbilly, strong in ways that are almost mythological. He would sweep the street with Conan, no problem. It wouldn't even be a fair fight. He is an agent of destruction, of accidental destruction.
Yep.
At a ferocious rate. He actually has family, which never shows up in Howard stories. But by God, Breck has family, and they always are getting him in trouble. They want him to go do this. They want him to go do that. Somebody got upset about something, and he gets in the middle of it, and somehow a town gets destroyed.
Yeah.
And it's all told in the first person. It's all told in kind of a. I assume that's supposed to be a Texas dialect, though he was in Nevada, in the Humboldt Mountains of Nevada. There actually are Humboldt Mountains in Nevada.
Yes.
You can, I've driven through them. I wish I would have gotten a picture with a road sign. That would have been nice. But but it's just so completely different, and they're funny stories. And for
Mhm.
people, I remember the first time I read one of them,
Oh yeah.
I couldn't believe that Bob Howard, the Conan guy, wrote this. And I really liked it, but I was just like, I can't believe this is the same guy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it right there, Uh so many people over the years who have come to Robert E. Howard days and visited the house and that have sat down and talked with us or whatever, one or more of us usually do a full court press on why you need to read more than just Conan.
Mhm.
And I can't even like tally up the number of people over the years who have come to me at the end of the day or the following year and gone, I had no idea. That's right.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
didn't. But welcome aboard. So yeah, the fact that they are funny and they're outlandish and exaggerated, and uh, I I I don't normally give DeCamp credit for much, but he used the word burlesque to describe them, and I do like that term for these. But they do have all of the vernacular of what I would call a Texas tall tale. Um, for those of us who are old enough to remember
Mhm.
uh, people that we grew up with, usually it was a friend of your dad's or maybe a cool
Mhm.
uncle that always had a story for you, always had some weird, outlandish story,
Mhm.
My dad's friend Gene Patty used to tell me about his ducks that could roller skate, and I just believed it, you know and it turns out I didn't know this until I was an adult. Turns out Gene Patty was full of shit. Who knew?
Who knew?
Well, that's a time honored tradition in Texas, and I'm sure other parts of the South and Southwest as well. The notion of the uh, the the yarn spinner, the front porch raconteur, and Howard was, I think, working in that tradition. First with Sailor Steve Costigan, but it really solidified with Breck uh,
Mhm.
completely. The Breck stories are more outlandish,
Mhm.
and they're I mean, there's a comical exaggeration to them. It's tempting to call it. It's tempting to bridge an analogy between Pecos Bill and Paul Bunyan. Oh, and the term for that, by the way, because I found out later that Pecos Bill was invented by a guy from Ohio, a shoe
Mhm.
salesman who went by the nickname Tex. Uh, he invented Pecos Bill,
Wow.
and
Okay.
the Texas Folklore Society called it fake lore, not
Yeah.
folklore, fake lore. So
Yeah.
I love that term. That's a great expression. Uh, and I think I could make a case. I wouldn't want to try it with two lawyers in the Zoom call with me, but I think I could argue successfully that this is fake lore in that tradition because of the various markers that Howard intuitively, I think, introduced, uh, writing down the vernacular of his spoken aloud stories.
Mhm.
We don't. I can't uh, emphasize enough what a big deal that is in the development of Texas literature and
Mhm.
Texas humor. I think this is one of the first examples that we have, if not the first example, published of truly Texas humor
Mhm.
in terms of how he constructed it, the methods he used, and the way he chose to present it. So I've written a lot about it, and there's an academic book, not academic, a mostly academic book coming out from A&M University Press, hopefully later this year, that gets into this in some more detail. I will not take up this whole time to talk about it, but I do think you ignore the funny side of Robert E. Howard at your own peril.
Mhm.
Definitely.
Uh,
Yeah.
I would say that this history of the tall tales and humor stuff, fake lore, for me, most prominently goes back to the tales about Davy Crockett, especially as you get them in the
Totally.
song for the Walt Disney television, where he killed a bear when he was only 3, or
Yep.
Uh, I think he grinned a raccoon out of a tree or something, stuff
Yep.
like that. And you get sort of that same idea with the Breckinridge Elkins, except it's much more violent. And, Mark,
Yes.
you're a big comic book fan. I don't know about you, Paul, but the comic character that most comes to mind for me with Breckinridge Elkins is the Tick, who's well nigh invulnerable to anything. And, kind-hearted guy, just wants to do right with everybody, but it's, about the same with Breck. Everything he gets involved with, he just destroys whatever happens. So,
Mhm.
It's tempting to might find a real equivalent. I don't have one, but Baby Huey always comes to mind,
Mhm.
as the guy who doesn't know his own strength and can't really tell when he's about to get into trouble, and the only way out of it is to make more trouble.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's a yeah. They're classic setups, and the putting them all together like this is great because you have them. But Action was a bi-monthly magazine, and so it looks like he didn't publish as many stories because Action was bi-monthly instead of monthly. But in fact, he was in every issue of Action for, was it 3 years, two and a half,
About 3 years.
3 years?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so when you think of it like that, here's this magazine that shows up, and Action was a kind of a general interest pulp. They had a lot of Western stuff and some other things. It was similar in a approach to Adventure magazine, which is, it's got a little bit of everything in it. But then there this Breckinridge Elkins story would be in here, man. And even if everything else was serious, or even if there was something else funny in here, that story always stood out in sharp relief against the rest of what was in the magazine. So it's a really cool, uh it feels like a magic trick. It still does. Especially for people, I love watching people who've never read Breck, and you see the light go on in their eyes.
Mhm.
Bill Cavalier's wife, Cheryl, uh has told me more than once how what a fan she is of Breckinridge Elkins, because she heard me read part of A
Mhm.
Gent from Bear Creek one year, and so she decided to go get one of the reprint copies, and she read it straight through the rest of the weekend and laughed the whole way. And
Mhm.
so I felt really pleased about that. But she came to me with just this look of wonder, like I just sawn a woman in half. Wasn't me, man. It was Bob. Bob
Yeah.
did it. And he did it
Yeah.
way, way long ago. So it was just nice to get the to be able to point it to somebody and say, check that out. And then they come back and go, oh yeah, that was wonderful. So I always like that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's move on to why did Bob decide to start writing humorous westerns? We could look probably to his humorous boxing stories with Sailor Steve Costigan. And were those being published in Action at that time, or were they in the fight stories?
Most
They
of them
started
were in
out in
fight stories.
action. They started out in action, then switched to fight stories.
Yeah. The he was still kind of trying to figure out the character of Steve Costigan, and it took a few like tries to sort of get all the pieces to line up just so. And when they do it, he was off to the races, man. I mean,
Mm.
once the dog gets in, it's all good.
Mhm.
But Fight Stories was one of those ones that it didn't seem like it should have been because of how popular boxing was, but it was kind of a niche pulp. And it was one of the ones when the Great Depression hit and everybody had to kind of close down for a little bit to sort of weather the economic collapse, because most of the pulp publishers, there were a few in other places, but a lot of the big ones were in New York City, which is where the financial disaster happened. So,
Mhm.
um, in the case of Fight Stories, it came back bi-monthly and then went to quarterly. And it was always kind of sporadic, but Action was kind of steady all the way through. And I don't know what made him decide to try a comical hillbilly. Um, I could make some guesses and some speculations, but we don't. That's the problem with Robert E. Howard's, we don't ever have a real sense of. He never clearly says, "Hey, this is why I did this." We just have to kind of
Yeah.
infer and guess.
And we can refer all the way back to his school homework where he did West is West.
Mhm.
And it's basically gets translated into the Jen from Bear Creek book is when Breck captures Captain Kidd, but it's about a tenderfoot shows up at a ranch. He's very eloquently speaking, and he wants a delicate horse. And the guy says, "Oh no, Whirlwind is perfectly fine. You'll have a great
Right.
time." And the horse goes berserk, and does all sorts of terrible things to him. And when he finally gets off, he's ready to shoot the guy because he got caught on the saddle horn and couldn't get off. And so he'd been writing, he'd actually written that stuff when he was young. And but there's kind of this big gap then till I guess 32, no, 34, somewhere up there before 33, somewhere there before he
33. Yeah.
yeah, before he started Breck, just kind of, and it's just like I'm with him. I have no idea what made him go. I think I need to write a giant funny hillbilly. Um,
I you the timeline helps a little bit because we know he was writing for Weird Tales at the time, and he was working on this as a side from when he was writing Conan, and
mm,
he took a break between in Conan basically to get right caught up because
Yeah.
they were sitting on unpublished stories, which means they were unpaid stories.
mhm,
And
mhm,
I think because Fiction House always paid on acceptance, and I think because he had a good relationship with Jack Byrne,
mhm,
I think that might have been one of the reasons why he went to action stories with this. And because I I think it was a lot easier for him to write Breckinridge Elkins
mhm,
because he had that voice already in his head. He already knew what that sounded like, what those stories,
mhm,
that rhythm and that cadence. And I think it was something that he could do. Um, I think it came easy for him.
mhm.
What they weren't easy. If you've ever tried to write humor, you know how serious and unfunny that is. But I think for him, he was able to kind of talk him out, and it was a very quick way to dash off 5,000 or so words and get a check. It wasn't going to be a great check, but there wasn't a lot of Weird Tales money rolling in at this point, and so
Mhm.
he needed some scratch. So
Mhm.
I again, all of this is conjectural,
Mhm.
and we can sift through and find a dozen other possible options, but really it just comes down to, I think, tonally it was different, and I think there was maybe an economic component. That's my opinion. Is I
Yeah.
think it was economics.
And it certainly let him write something completely different. If he needed to get away
Yeah,
from the other stuff for a little bit, it let him use a completely different voice and a completely different attitude of what he was writing, and maybe made it a lot more fun. Just have a little laid back. Let me write something that's kind of fun. So,
yeah. No, I think you're right. He got in trouble, or not got in trouble, but when he was doing the historical adventure stuff,
mhm,
also for Farnsworth, right? There was a several issue long debate in the letter column about something that he wrote into a story. And
mhm.
it was these were basically scholars arguing about whether or not Muslims drank alcohol.
Yeah, yeah.
And he writes, I don't remember who the letter was to, but it's a quote that we've pulled from a lot. There is no endeavor more zestful to me than the rewriting of history as fiction.
Mhm.
Lovecraft, I think.
It was Lovecraft. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, here's a story that doesn't require fact checking, a character that he doesn't have to think about. Um, I think it was for him a way to sort of step away from that. I mean, he'd done his own history with the Hyborian Age, and he had that in his head. But he'd done maps, and he knew where the continents were and the countries, and he had a sense of that. And it was still, you know, he's accessing this undreamed of age that doesn't exist except in a theoretical space, and he's turning it into fiction. with Breckinridge Elkins, I think all he's got to do is kind of look around outside his window and go, well, what's happening out here? The other day, Pap and I were talking, and then off you go. So
Yeah. But it's also it's kind of another set of world building because
oh yeah,
he picks a place, he builds the history, says here's how they got here, here's when Pap showed up or Uncle whoever, and he and he knows where the little towns are, and he kind of places stuff, and which one's is a cow town and which one's a sheep town, and he gets all the a lot of it just kind of piles on a little at a time, and we've
yeah.
never seen the Breckenridge age essay like we have the Hyborian age, which would be just fascinating to read. But
I would read it just for the map. I just want the map. I don't think it matters very much. It's certainly not, but I would like to know the relationship between Chawed Ear and Grizzly Claw. I need to know what the distance is there. That would be interesting to know. So yeah.
Two things I would also throw out there is that from reading his letters, we know that especially in his letters to Clyde Smith, he would try out writing little burlesques. So pretty much most of his career, at some points, he would be trying to write some comedy, whether he would try to publish it or not, just to try it out. And then also, I would say that what helps him in writing these stories is the fact that he also loved to go and talk to all of the old people he saw and ask them about their lives in Texas, as Texas was becoming first a republic and then a state in the United States, what it was like to live here. So he had all of that additional history from talking to those people that he could draw on and writing his stories.
One other thing I want to throw in there, we don't want to give people the impression that he just tossed these off and they were kind of, half-ass works.
No.
Every one of these stories, we have multiple drafts for, at least 3 drafts of everything. And you look at it and you think it seems like it just flows just like that. And when you go back and you start rereading the drafts, you start seeing where he'll just tweak a sentence here, tweak a sentence there, move this out, fatten this up, change what he's calling this. And it's so fascinating to see how he polishes a work, even though it's just this, this real lighthearted, all in Texas accent stuff. It's all carefully polished.
Yeah.
And comes out really well. And I think that's part of why it comes out so good is that he gets the Bob Howard part of it in there, that really professional writer who knows how to really make us hit just the right, the poet who knows how to hit just the right word, just the right place to make it pop. And he was good at that.
Yeah. Yeah. For a lot of people, their first draft is a skeleton. His first draft was almost always a skinned corpse.
Yeah, most of it was there. Yeah,
he put a lot of muscle on there going in, and so it was just a matter. The tweaks were, they are fascinating. And it's nice to know personally. It's nice to know that he that he struggled with word choice sometimes. It's just you tend to think of him as this bulletproof guy, but no, he scratched stuff out and moved things around and would give up on something that wasn't working. We don't have a lot of give ups with the Brecks, though. There's not a lot of fragments.
But there's one, and what you really don't see a lot of is where he'll write a story, he'll blow it almost completely done, and then go, no, and just drop the whole thing and say, I'll take the premise, I'll take the start, I'm going to completely rewrite all the rest of them. We don't see that in any of his genres. You hardly ever see that.
Yeah.
And when he wrote A Gent from Bear Creek, the short story, he started it out as a completely different story.
Yeah.
It was, it had the same starting premise. So I got to go find this guy that stole the gold. But then it turned into a completely different story. And it was so weird because we knew nothing about it till we got to see the Glenn typescripts. And as I'm sorting through things one day, I pull out this random page. There was a few piles of random pages. I pull it out and it's Breck fighting a grizzly up on a cliff. And I'm going, Breck doesn't fight a grizzly on a cliff. What the hell is this? And it took me about 6 months to find all the rest of the pages to put it together. And it turned out he had a whole complete story. That was the 3rd draft.
Yep.
When he got to that point, and then he just said no. And he completely started over, completely wrote the story in a couple more drafts and sent it off. And I was just and that of course is included in volume one, but it had never been, if we know, we had never seen that before. It was just shocking to have that come through
Yeah.
and pop out of there to see him. You never see him give up on one like that and start over. But yeah, he really worked those stories over. So it's good to
Yeah.
see. So
It was nice. And I also I want to shout out to the format of the Foundation Press books has always been, if you're getting the book, you're getting everything
mhm.
extant that we know of. There have been a couple of instances
Mhm.
in the last 20 years where, oh, we'll have to put that in the new edition
That's
because you
right.
find something.
That's right.
But it's honestly, what's nice about this is, as a fan of these books, you can certainly just read the stories.
Mhm.
But if you really want that deeper dive, I recommend looking at the drafts and looking at the notes. Paul
Mhm.
kept very detailed and meticulous changes whenever these things were put together. And I'm sure John has talked about this on other podcasts as well. But the authoritative texts were created by basically taking all of the additions and finding the commonalities, and then if there was something that was important that was left out, it got put back in, and if there was something that needed uh, to be changed or corrected for spelling, that was changed or corrected and then noted. So any changes were noted, but these texts are the most complete versions of these stories that exist. So
Well, and to kind of fill in some more on that, the editing philosophy for the series has always been, if Bob's got what we think is a final draft, and Bob didn't keep a reference file of here's my reference version of each story. So if something a final draft, that's always a good question, but we usually have a good feel with it. There's ways to tell on a lot of the stuff,
yeah,
and I won't go into long discussions about typescripts, but the we'll go with, if there's a final draft, we use that. We don't use the published version, we use the final draft
right,
because Byrne was a great guy. Byrne edited. Farnsworth Wright wouldn't touch anything, except he changed the title occasionally. But other than that, he'd leave everything, misspellings and incomplete sentences, and he didn't care. He was leaving everything. Where Byrne would go in and randomly throw in an extra paragraph. And you're like, why are you putting in an extra? Or he just, he'd break it up into three paragraphs, or he'd throw in a line somewhere just for the fun of it that he thought needed to be there for effect. And Bob never chirped about it. He said, yeah, sure, fine, whatever. Check clears, you're good. You're an editor, do what you want to do. The and so we've always gone with especially in the Breck stuff, you really want to have the drafts when they're available. There's been somewhere um, there's not a complete final draft, and when that happens, and we kind of look at stuff, we may think about, do we want to take one more draft back and fill in with that, or do we want to use a published version and fill in with that? And there's just choices to be made in there, that you
yeah,
have to make. Like in this book, in the new edition of Volume One, we switched. Pistol Politics had previously been the published version, but my man in Norway, Stola, because we had the carbon of what was apparently the final draft, but it was so faint and so light it was almost unreadable. And Stola and his AI have gotten really good at pulling cleaning up those things and making them readable. And so he was able to come up with a whole new text that was the final draft we had never seen before. And so we got to put that in and replace the published version. And then we, like you said, we always find some other things. We had came across some synopsis that a lot of these stories started out as he would write like literally one paragraph of what the story is going to be about, and then he'd go write the story. And sometimes put three of them on one page, just loading them up, getting them ready to go. So we added some more of those too. But that's sort of our general philosophy. We try real hard to let Bob be Bob. That's Mark and I are old enough and from the 90s era, the 80s and 90s era when Sprague de Camp tried to bury Bob and make him go away and never exist and completely strip him out of Conan and everybody was editing Bob. No one would leave him alone because everybody thought they knew better. And an editor's job is to do some editing. I don't mind, I'll correct if there's an obvious spelling error, I can fix the spelling error. I don't care. Now not in Breck because it's all written in vernacular, so it all looks goofy anyway. But you don't do much in there. But in a lot of the other stuff, you if he missed a word, you fix it for him. And he didn't worry about it. He's going to send it to a place. They got editors. They'll fix it if they care. No one's going to get excited. And off he'd go. And the I was making a point there. I just got lost. But anyway, yeah. So we've really tried to bring them back around to where they were originally, and we remember when everybody tried to stop that. So around 2000, when we were when I did the complete Yellow Jack and the complete action stories, and started looking at in 2007 we started these editions, and they'd already started on the Del Reys. And the Del Reys were the same thing. We're going to do it exactly the way Bob wrote it. We're no more of this, everybody doing their version.
Right.
We're going back to the source. And that was our mantra as well. And so if you have all the Del Reys, have all the Foundation Press books, you got everything Bob ever freaking wrote.
Yep.
In as clean a transcribed version as you can get, which is really nice. You also mentioned drafts. I don't think it's hit the press yet, but Stola, because he doesn't have enough to do on the weekend.
Yeah.
I try to keep him busy, I do, but he decided he wanted to transcribe all of the drafts of all of the Breck stories. And so he did. And it took him many a moon to get that done. And it's going to be a 4-volume set with slipcase.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's going to be faboo.
Yeah, really sweet.
I shudder to think what it's going to cost because it's going to be so big. And it's definitely going to be for the completest researcher type. It's
Totally.
just not a lot of light reading, but because you're reading the same story 3 times with just lots of changes rolling through it as you go. So, but I thought that was kind of interesting. That's where he wants to do all the typescripts eventually, and that's the ones he wanted to start with was Breck, which I thought was for a Norwegian, because you have to kind of explain it to him. What the hell are these guys talking about?
I want to completely blame his trip to Texas on that. I think we charmed the pants off of him when he came to Howard Days a few years ago, and so yeah, I think it's our fault. So
yeah, I think it's our fault. So
yeah,
we'll take credit either way.
We'll take some of it. That's the thing. Those typescripts are fun. I did one of the introductions for one of the volumes. He got the usual suspects together to do those, and I'm really I didn't know that was an area of interest for him. You mentioned that he was using an AI tool to pull that out. I just in case, I want to say it again so that they know. Howard reused his carbons sometimes 2 or 3 times because you could back then. Whenever he would type a story, he would have a carbon between them, so he'd have a copy, and the what he sent off would be what he sent to the publisher. He'd have a copy for himself, and then he would then reuse that carbon paper again, and until he wasn't getting a good impression or whatever, and he'd get a new sheet. Those carbons have yielded some results over the years. There have been a couple of instances where we've gone to the carbon because Glenn had it, and we're able to look at it and pull it back and reverse it and do not AI Photoshop magic with it to get it to come out. And so the whatever program Stoll is using right now, looks at the letters piled on top of each other and can pull them off like that. I normally I'm of the opinion that the robots will kill us and AI is grift, but
at least a little bit good for us first.
But yeah, in this particular instance, this is a great example of something that would have been pretty impossible to do with the naked eye.
Oh yeah,
and I mean there would be no way to separate that out with any kind of consistency or fidelity. And so for the computer to do that, and then of course, you got to double check it like everything, but yeah, fascinating that he's done that and found new stuff. Oh my God, how cool is that?
Yeah, he actually came across. I don't know. We didn't broadcast, I don't know, but he recently came across another draft of Hand of the Black Goddess. And he was really excited when he first found it because he thought, oh, this is a new draft. And then when he actually went through, he said, oh, wait, this is D3, third draft. We've got the type pages. Now he's got the carbon pages, which were dumped on top of something else. And we're just barely faintly there. And he pulled it out. And he went through it and I said, yeah, it's exactly what it is, page for page. But so it was like, oh, well, it's a good try, though,
Impressive as hell in any case.
Oh, yeah.
Totally.
Hell yes. Hell yes. I'm impressed. So.
Yes. John, what else you got for us, brother?
Well, we've kind of talked about it a little bit, but you mentioned, Mark, about how successful Breckinridge Elkins was for Robert E. Howard, and that for about 2.5 years, every issue of Action Stories had a Breckinridge Elkins story in it. And for folks who were, as we mentioned his name, of Jack Byrne, who was the editor for Fight Stories and Action Stories until he left to go over to work for Argosy. And in volume 2 of Breckinridge Elkins, we've included one of the letters that Jack Byrne sent to Robert E. Howard's agents, who Otis Adelbert Klein and Associates, to Miss Viola Irene Cooper, where it's dated March 1st, 1935, where Jack is saying this is the story that Bob had sent me. I think it's the Cupid of Bear Creek. Mm-hmm. And he was saying it doesn't work for me. And he then goes into I think these changes should be made. So I
wrote a whole new synopsis. So change it like this.
Yeah. And so I'm going to assume that Jack, because I know that I was looking through, I think we have one or two other letters from Jack Byrne to Bob or Otis Klein, where he's talking about stories that Bob did. And so it seems like Jack really was one of these hands-on editors who did try and contact Bob and give him some sort of feedback on the stories that he was writing.
He got a little with the Costigan. He wrote, there's a letter that got or part of a letter that got published in the collected letters by way of something that he wrote to Clyde Smith, that Byrne said, glad to see that you're sending more Sailor Steve stories to us. All of us here are for him, there was also a synopsis that he sent Howard, a boxing synopsis that Howard wrote into a story that Jack rejected.
What a stupid idea.
I call Farnsworth Wright a capricious editor. Jack Byrne was really the capricious one. He was.
That's bad.
Maybe not capricious. Maybe mercurial would be better.
Yeah, not like that.
Really, yeah. But this is the thing, and I want to mention the word success. It's it's tough because even as the Weird Tales Erie, the letter column was calculating like what the number one story is, and anytime it was a Conan or one of the other big ones, Howard's story was usually first or second, and the only other person that was ever usually first over him was Seabury Quinn. There wasn't, I mean, it was really those two for about 4 years. Yeah. But this is the important thing: is as cool as that was and all that, they owed him money, a lot of money. And even though Byrne would routinely change and do stuff and not really tell him and just publish it, he paid him for it. He paid him for it. That's it's weird to think that was a measure of success, but for him it was. He's a guy that needed the money, and the Depression wiped out at least one bank account, if not two. And I wouldn't be surprised if he started keeping money under the mattress like everybody else. But the fact that he published Howard and then took Howard with him to Argosy, and I'm going to put that in air quotes. You know what I mean? Yeah. I think that would have been the real stepping stone, and to me that was where the next phase of his career was going, and it would have been with Byrne. I think doing that stuff, because he had a market. He was building funny cowboys for Argosy, and cowboy stories. I mean, this would have been the next big thing for him, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's why he wrote, I guess it was August or Leth, that he said that he was probably going to start writing nothing but Westerns from here on out, was because he had these several paying markets. He had, Breckinridge Elkins were still with Action. He was writing, excuse me, Pike Bearfield for Jack Byrne over at Argosy. Had the Buckner J. Grimes stories going with whoever. And then we'll probably get into it a little bit when we start talking a little bit more about Breckinridge Elkins Volume 1. But the rejected Breckinridge Elkins story, Elkins Never Surrenders, that he changed into a Bearfield Elston and finally got sold to another pulp. And they probably would have said, yeah, send us some more of this for our Western pulp too. So he
Mhm.
had markets that were paying on acceptance, whereas Weird Tales was only paying on publishing. And that was only when they had the money saved up that they
Yeah.
could send him what they owed him. So
Right.
Yeah.
Did we ever know? I'm sure that there was some sort of record of it, if anything. Uh, what did it, Paul? Did you ever see if what the cost was on the Jenkins edition of Gent? Did they did they send Klein money for that manuscript?
I don't know. I assume they did, but I don't
Right.
know how much he got for. I don't remember seeing it on the books, but I'm sure he got paid something for it.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I just don't know what it was. So
It, worth looking into, but not essential, I guess. I'm just
yeah,
curious.
yeah. We need to ask the team that question. Somebody probably knows the answer, like
That's
Patrice or
that's a group chat.
Rusty.
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a good one. So.
All right, well, let's start moving into drilling down on the Breckinridge Elkins character and his family. Uh, as you mentioned, unlike all of his other characters, or most of his other characters, because as Breckinridge got a hit and he started doing his Breckinridge Elkins knockoff characters, they also had family members that got involved in the stories too.
Mhm.
But Breck has quite the extended family.
Yes.
And one of the things, I hate to say it, but I believe it was DeCamp who was always saying that Bob had a terrible way with using and reusing names. And, you know, you have all of these characters in Breckinridge Elkins family tree that all are, their names pop up for the later characters that he created for the Breck knockoffs and some of the others. So would y'all like to start going through some of his characters in the
Well,
family that,
let me point out, Stola again, when he went through all of the drafts, he also wanted to do a family tree of
Yeah.
everybody, all the families and who they all were. And when he got all done with that, there was only like one name. I mean, there was a lot of names. There was just dozens and dozens and dozens of different names, and only one name got repeated, I think, out of that whole stack that he just constantly would just, of course, he was just, at that point, he was like every little town nearby, every county,
Yep.
whatever was handy to name something with, that's what he was going with, and so he pulled a whole lot of different names to do that with. And the extended, once you see Stola's list and see how big the extended family is, you're wondering if Bob kept track of it all in his head. He probably did, but did he? Again, the Breckinridge age needed to be
Yeah.
written to show all this.
Yeah.
I just don't know how he kept track of it all. Didn't end up reusing names or getting confused about who's married to whom and all that because he had all that in there. So
I you I don't I can't prove, no one can,
mhm.
that he was lifting characters and characteristics from real people. I think he was, and I feel like maybe he was doing his thing where he pulled a bit from here and a bit from here, and
Mhm.
that's cousin Erath, right? Or
Yeah,
whatever. But I do think that his I think the naming conventions, uh I think it might have been deliberate
yeah,
because all of his aunts are named after counties. Texas counties,
yeah,
Lavaca, Atascosa.
Yeah,
and,
yeah,
and not
yeah.
only that, but
Zavala, yeah.
yeah, there. And the thing is it's the kind of interesting names. It's not like Wise County or Clay
Yeah,
County. Oh no,
yeah.
no, no, no. It's interesting names with cool. I mean, I don't know what I think in Texas, Lavaca
Hmm.
vaca is cow. So
Hmm.
I'm sure that had something to do with it. But and then Breckenridge, of course, is named after Breckenridge, Texas, spelled
Hmm.
differently.
Hmm.
So I like that, for being set in the Humboldt Mountains in Nevada. And I think that was done because he had several people in town who were reading his stuff.
Hmm.
And I think he set it in Nevada so that he wouldn't tip anybody off, or at least he'd have plausible deniability.
That's right. That's
It's in
right.
the Humboldt Mountains. It's not in West Texas. That's silly. uh Nobody like that's around here, and I don't think
Yeah,
that ever was a situation, but I think
yeah,
he did it. That was just a level of protection to make sure that
yeah,
you know he could keep good relations with everybody.
yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, we do know that at least Isaac Howard's side of the family was, well, they both were big. Actually, Isaac was, didn't he have 8 brothers, or was he one of 8? And Hester's family was huge with lots of cousins and aunts and uncles. Aunts. It was a lot of aunts. And it's easy to see, that kind of large family, but you can't map it directly. I'm only saying that because I want to caution anybody who might want to try. It's too much. There's not enough. You have to make a lot of leaps because these
Mhm.
characters have all been exaggerated and
Mhm.
they've been lampooned, and they're the the tenets that they are picking up are those large personality traits that you associate with Texans, pride, quick to anger, uh, individualistic,
Mhm.
those are the big things. And I think that I mean, you could ascribe that to Howard. You could ascribe it to any of his friends. They were all like that. We
Mhm.
still all are. But I do think that the big family is really significant because this happens near the end of Howard's life. This happens as Hester's health is taking a turn for the worse. She'd been dealing with tuberculosis and those flare ups for his whole life, but it's really only like 1931, 1932 that that she starts needing more frequent treatments. That's when he's home more. That's when they're driving other places to take the waters, mineral
Mhm.
wells and other places like that. Hot springs. Those
Mhm.
were very popular for tuberculosis back then. So
Yeah.
I think that him being close to home equals Breckenridge Elkins being surrounded by a lot of family members who, as he says this many times in a lot of different ways, that's the trouble with being the biggest member of your clan. Everybody always heaps their troubles upon your considerable shoulders,
Mhm.
and you can. It's really tempting to read some of that into what was being asked of Robert at the time. Stay at
Mhm.
home, take care of mom. She needs her
Yeah.
medicine every night by this time. Just little things like that sort of kept him in place.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's really tough to speculate because I don't want to do it online because speculation online leads to this ironclad fact was
That's right.
said to me on YouTube. But I do think you have to kind of look at all that.
Yeah.
Uh, Paul,
Yeah.
what do you think? I mean, is that too frou frou or?
Well, I think that, my dad, was raised on a farm. He was one of 8. My mom was raised farm. She was one of 6. I
Mhm.
think that part of farm life for a long time in this country was based on you have a lot of kids because they're your free labor.
Yeah.
And so everybody has lots of kids and everybody has a big extended family. You get all kinds of interesting characters in the big extended family. I remember somebody telling me, I don't remember who it was. There's a one story where Breck rides into town and he goes to the doctor. And the doctor's this tall, straight, dignified, sticks a shotgun out at him and then calmly says, you need to go up in the hills. There's a guy up there got a problem. And he says, well, I'll tell him you're the biggest man and the biggest fool I've ever seen. And very austere, and then rides off. And a lot of people said, I wonder if that's Doc Howard. Is that where Doc Howard got slipped into a story where he tried to be respectful now? They never was really talking about his family, I think, as much as they probably he and all his friends, and especially all the people that come in off the ranches and the farms, they probably all had stories about, oh, I got this cousin,
Right.
and instead of being like the rest of us, he was going to go do this.
Yeah.
And he was kind of crazy, and da 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 da. There was this time, and that's all part of the stories, And so
Mhm.
I think, well, like I said, I think it maybe gave him an outlet though to talk about that stuff, about a character who really cares about his family, who
Right.
really, he's not out to run away from them. He's not out to go out and be his own guy and live somewhere else. He's really big on, I'm going to, when the family needs him, he answers the call, whatever it is. Even if he doesn't like it, even if it's inconvenient, even if it's interfering with his love life, he's going to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very noticeable part of it.
Now, let me
The
read this one quick line from the Riot at Cougar Paw. My family always imposes onto my good nature. Generally, I'd rather go do what they want me to do than to go to the trouble with arguing with them.
Hmm.
yep. There you go. Yeah, both of the humor series, the boxing stories and the hillbilly stories, work on the idea and turn on the idea of family dynamics and family troubles. In the case of Sailor Steve Costigan, it's his found family, right? The ship, the old man, Mike. That's the family he puts together from being a man on the other side of the world. In Breck's case, it's just the family. You don't see that in any of the serious series characters, not really. There might be a mention here or there, but this is really the only time that the family takes the stage in a meaningful and significant way. Usually is something driving the plot, the engine of the plot,
Hmm.
whether it's Pap saying, "Go deliver this letter," or the his one of his uncles saying, "I got to get that gold watch back," or whatever it is. It's usually the family that comes to him and starts the trouble, or it's the family that gets in after the story is started and messes things up. So,
Hmm.
boy, those are yeah. It's interesting that only in the funny stuff do we have that kind of lampooning of other characters. Interesting.
And for all I know, maybe he did it because it made it easy to write a story. It made it
Mhm.
easy to start every time. You didn't have to dream up anything crazy. It's Pap sent me to go pick up a letter at the post office. So
Right.
and so lost his wife. This guy jilted my sister. I've just mind my own business, and they dumped this tenderfoot on me.
Yep.
And then he irritates the whole extended family, and I got to fight 23 relatives at once. Um, so it may have been that was just part of it, was because it made it easy for him to write the stories quickly too. And like I said, and supposedly he and the other guys would sit around on the porch with the old guys, and they would all sit around and swap stories of
Yeah.
tall tales. And you got to hear all this kind of stuff. So you can see where that fits in. Everybody has family. So when you tell a funny story about family, people go, yeah, yeah.
Yep.
They all got somebody like that. They know. So
Yeah. For
maybe.
being so exaggerated and over the top, they're also really relatable. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. All right.
Well,
I'm going to look something up. Go ahead.
shall we start going through volume number one? There are 19 stories in it.
You want me
And
to read all of them?
not, well, it would be
Really
great.
fast.
But I thought we would just probably go, depending on how you guys feel, either each of us come up with one or two of our favorite stories out of the book. Just talk a
That's
little bit
that's
about
hard to
them.
do. I
Yeah.
mean, I think it's more like maybe we can remember a couple of our favorite scenes, the ones that just
Yeah.
broke us up and we couldn't. It was just so funny we couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, because I always tell people, the one that got me was the guys are holed up in the cabin. He needs to get the guys out of the cabin so he can do what he needs to do to fight these guys. And they all got rifles. It's a clearing around it. He doesn't know how the hell he's going to get down there without getting shot. And he don't get a shot. And then it's a Feud Buster. And then he hears a cougar squall
Yep.
it's already nighttime. He hears a cougar squall off in the distance. And so he goes, "Oh, I know what to do." And he rides Captain Kidd over to this bluff and starts climbing up it. And he squalls a couple times to get he said, and everyone knows that Elkins man can fool a cougar. We're so good at it. And sure enough, he gets the cougar to squall back, and he gets there and finds it in the cave. And the cougar surprises him, takes a swat at him, and he ducks it and punches the cougar and drags it out by the scruff of the neck and hauls it down the cliff, and then gets back on Captain Kidd and describes this. There are few things less pleasant than riding a iron-jawed outlaw at midnight through the woods while holding on to a ill-tempered cougar who is not happy to be here, who's trying to constantly clawing and scratching at me. And every now and then he'd miss me and claw Captain Kidd, and the kid would buck and snap, and he's trying to bite the cougar and biting my leg, and I had to pound him on the head to get him to stop it. And when he finally gets there, he just, hauls off, throws the cougar through the window, and there you go. Everybody leaves, Everybody comes out the door. Poof, there you go. And I just thought that was just one of the best passages about riding an iron-jawed outlaw at midnight, holding on to a cougar. Picking him off of me was like picking a burr out of a cow's tail.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, well, so that reminds me of because that's a great one. He every once in a while would do this sort of, I mean, his cadence, if you read these especially out loud, you really get a sense of voice, but every once in a while he'll do that thing where he kind of Faulknerizes and just keeps going, and you keep thinking any second now he's going to get to the end, and then nope, there's something else.
Yeah.
I love those moments, and I don't know what that's called. I need to figure out what it is. All right, I'll read you. This is the opening for War on Bear Creek, which I just think is one of the best ones, because it's not quite in media res, but it's a wonderful setup. They do it now all the time, where they'll start the TV show with somebody getting the bejesus beat out of him in a room, and then he goes, "Let me back up and tell you how we got here."
Yeah,
it's a standard sort of a thing. Well, this is a Howardian version of this. "Pigs," said Pap, digging the 19th buckshot out of my shoulder, "is more disturbing to the peace of a community than scandal, divorce, and corn liquor put together. And," says Pap, pausing to strop his buoy on my scalp where the hair was all burnt off, "when a razorback hog is combined with a lady school teacher, a English tenderfoot, and a passel of bloodthirsty relatives, the result is appalling for a peaceable man to behold. Hold still till John gets your ears sewed back on."
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I really want to know what happens after this. And the next thing is, Pap was right. I wasn't to blame for what happened. Just great. And War on Bear Creek's one of those ones where there's just this like confluence of stuff, just it's a huge pile up. And I just absolutely adore the ones where eventually the whole town's involved, and then he does this little summary at the end where he says, "Now look, everybody says that I threw that at him on purpose, but it's not true. I was just trying to get the stove off of me, or whatever." Just fantastic.
And no one mentioned he was coming up the back stairs with a sawed-off
shotgun. That's right. Yeah, they left that part out. Fantastic. Oh my gosh.
I started reading the Breckinridge Elkins stories from once the first edition came out. And I thought, the first story, Mountain Man, was okay. I could see the humor in it. There were a couple of funny points, but the second story, Guns of the Mountain,
yes,
I was reading that and I just nearly died laughing, because to me it reads exactly at points like a Looney Tunes cartoon with Bugs Bunny or the Roadrunner. And I want to read this one passage. What is the setup on the story is that Breck's uncle Garfield Elkins got his watch stolen in a robbery, so they send Breck off to go find the robbers and get the watch back. So he's riding through the brush and somebody starts shooting at him and he proceeds to disarm the guy. And the guy says, well, I'm the sheriff. We got the robbers holed up in this cabin down below. And Breck says, oh, I don't believe you. Where's your star? And the guy says, oh, I lost it in the brush, but I'm going to go ahead and deputize you. So this is what he says. Hold up your right hand, Elkins, requested Hopkins. So I done so, wondering what for. And he says, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? E pluribus unum, anno dominecer, to wit, in status quo. What the hell are you talking about? I demanded. Them which God has joined asunder, let no man put together, said Hopkins. Whatever you say will be used against you, and the Lord have mercy on your soul. That means you're a deputy. I just swore you in.
And Breck immediately says, go sit on tap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yes.
You know, I edited these recently. I got all this, so much was stuck in my head for a short time now until I do another book. So
Fantastic. Yep. Okay, so I just referred to this. I'll go ahead and do this one too. This is A Stranger in Grizzly Club. This is the one that Paul and I were just talking about. Because this is another one that just, I mean, the way this works is fantastic. This is almost a checklist of what happens in the story. The reason I'm giving the full facts of this here affair is to refute a lot of rumors which is circulating about me. I am sick and tired of these lies about me terrorizing the town of Grizzly Claw and ruining their wagon yard just for spite and trying to murder all their leading citizens. There's more than one side to anything. These folks, which is going around telling about me knocking the mayor of Grizzly Claw down a flight of steps with a kitchen stove, ain't yet added that the mayor was trying to blast me with a sawed-off shotgun. As for saying that all I done was with malice aforethought, if I were a hot-headed man, like some I know, I could easily lose my temper over this here slander. But being shy and retiring by nature, I keeps my dignity and merely remarks that these gossipers is blamed liars, and I will kick the ears off of them if I catch them. Yep. Done and done. That's it. Right there.
Here we go. That's right.
And so there's in the middle of all of this, right? You know, the story starts, he gets going, one communication and misunderstanding after another piles up. And then when the Donnybrook gets going in earnest, there's a part at which he said, and that's when the mayor come at me with a sawed-off shotgun. And it broke me up because I'd forgotten about it. He did a callback. There's a callback in that story. Yeah. But but the thing is, I think that when you're talking about the crafting of humor in terms of a joke, you've got certain beats that you've got to hit. And the fact that he was able to, because he uses a lot of different techniques. These stories, while being all sort of routinely funny, and he does reuse certain concepts, they vary from story to story. You know, not every story is murder and mayhem, and sometimes he's talking about what happened, and sometimes he's not. But it's interesting to see how many ways he got around the plot to get to the funny things, and there's a couple of scholarly works on the nature of folklore, and specifically Southwestern folklore and tall tales, as it applies to Texans. And these folklorists have made, you know, studies of all of these oral traditions and isolated down like some key components. And you find one of the really good ones on Southwestern folklore identified 10 components, 10 tenets that keep, you know, that drive the story. Howard used 9 of the 10.
Wow.
In every single funny story that he did. I don't mean 9 all at the same time. I mean, of the 10, he used 9 of the 10 in his humor writing.
Hmm.
I I'm that's pretty good.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to say, well, he wasn't really working in that tradition, because here's 6 stories where he is, and 5
Mhm.
stories over here where he's doing something else. I don't
Mhm.
know. Those are the language is what gets me, and I get lost in it all the time. John, do you have another one that you really like from here?
Yeah. First off, we've mentioned it, but we haven't really discussed his horse, Captain Kidd. And for those of you who've read the Costigan stories where you've got Mike the Bulldog, Captain Kidd is nothing like Mike the Bulldog.
No.
No, no, sir.
You know,
It's a contentious relationship.
yeah, it's it's not, you get it in these short stories, but my one of my favorites is when you read the fix-up novel, A Gent from Bear Creek. One of the extra things that Bob wrote into that story to help put it together and string it into a novel is the second chapter, Meet Captain Kidd, where he talks about how he met his horse and how Captain Kidd became his horse. And we're going to do a part 2 to this for volume 2. So we'll probably talk a little bit more about that. But that is absolutely hilarious. That one story where he sets up this incredibly mean, vicious horse, and how Breckinridge has to go and tame this horse. And the whole setup is just hilarious in that one chapter. But this one story in this book that I like, it's the riot at Cougar Paw.
Yeah.
And what happened, the setup is that Breck is working in the blacksmith area that they have, I guess, at their ranch or farm or whatever they have in Nevada. And his brother John comes in and starts cutting down Captain Kidd. So Breck decides to take it out on John. So when John is making fun of Breck being a Breckenridge and Breck being a blacksmith, and John sticks his foot up on the anvil and says, "Hey, put a horseshoe on me." Breckenridge picks up one. As he says, he uses a 16-pound sledgehammer because the other tools, hammers that blacksmiths use are just too wimpy to use.
That's right.
So he takes the 16-pound sledgehammer and just slams it down on John's foot. So John and Breckenridge make up afterwards, and John says, "Well, I got this thing going on in Cougar Paw where this guy, Bill Santry, owes me something. So will you go over to Cougar Paw to get what Bill Santry owes me?" So Breck, being the good-natured guy, says, "Oh, sure, I'll go over there." So he goes over to Cougar Paw and goes into the store, and there's Bill Santry with a bunch of other people, and he says, "I'm Breckinridge Elkins, John Elkins' brother. I'm here to get what you owe him." And Bill Santry says, "Okay," and picks up a wagon yoke and busts it over Breck's head. And a big fight breaks out. Breck beats everybody up until the sheriff comes running in with a shotgun, arrests him, and throws him in jail and says, "You're not getting out. You owe us $500 for the damage you did to the store," which is the mayor's store. And so that night, another bad person, big, huge monster of a man, comes into town and starts tearing up the store. So the sheriff is scared to death. He runs in and says, "Breck, we'll call it even if you go beat up the guy that's tearing up the store and saloon in there." And Breck says, "Oh, okay." So he goes walking into the saloon store. And wouldn't you know that the guy who's tearing up the store is his cousin, cousin Bearfield Buckner. So they have their little tete-a-tete. And Buckner says, "Well, what are you doing here?" And Breckenridge tells him why he's there and says, "For me to get out of here, I have to beat you up." And this is what Buckner says: "What kind of kinfolks are you?" He scowled. "I don't mind a friendly fight between relatives, but your intentions is mercenary and unworthy of a true Elkins. You put me in mind of the fact that your old man had to leave Texas account of a hoss getting its head tangled in a lariat he was toting in his absent-minded way." "That there is a cussed lie," I said with her heat. "Pat left Texas because he wouldn't take the Yankee oath after the Civil War, and you know it. Anyway," I said bitingly, "nobody can ever say that Elkins ever stole a chicken and roasted it in a chaparral thicket." He started violently and turned pale. What you hinting at, you son of a Baliol? He whispered, he hollered. Your iniquities ain't no family secret, I assured him bitterly. Aunt Atascosa writ Uncle Jeopard Grimes about you stealing that there Wyandotte hen off of old man Westfall's roost. So they go ahead and get into a big knockdown, drag out fight. And he, basically they tear the whole town down. And the people start turning on Breckinridge after he knocks out his cousin. So Breckinridge is holding him off and grabs his cousin. They go riding out of town. And that was a great story about him just having one of his relatives coming into town who's as big and as mean as he is. And they just have this huge fight, just totally destroying this town.
Yeah.
It's amazing the amount of punishment that Breck takes. I mean, it's superhuman, bordering on supernatural at times.
Yeah.
But I mean, even with the first one, like even with the Mountain Man, he sets that up, right? I was robbing a bee tree when Pap told me to get down off of there, and I felt something sort of stinging around my ear, and I reckon that's what it was. And I'm like, if a bee had stung me on the ear, I'd have lost my mind. But it's just nothing to him,
Yeah.
And at the end of it, he, after making a shambles of everything, he, complains that the city just ain't no place for a boy who ain't reached his full strength yet,
Yeah, hadn't reached his full size and maturity. So
That's it. That's it.
Oh my God.
I'm glad that they used. I'm glad that he used Meet Captain Kidd in the novel, because I think that is probably one of the best examples of his humor writing, and I think it's really tight. And I honestly feel like that's a nearly perfect chapter. And it's the kind of that is the one, if I ever need to like convince people of the power of Breck Elkins and the funny stuff, I read the part from Meet Captain Kidd where he's on top of Captain Kidd trying to break him. That scene is hysterical. And you don't have to be a Conan fan to get it. In fact, I have used the Breck stories and that novel and that chapter on a lot of people in Cross Plains and other small towns, and people that otherwise wouldn't have read Robert E. Howard if their head was on fire. And they go, well, heck, I didn't know he could do that. Yeah. So it's just fantastic. They still hold up. The vernacular can be a little weird, and I will advise anybody that wants to read these, if you trip over something that, if you're reading something and it doesn't seem to make sense, say it out loud. Try it out loud, because when you talk it out loud, you interpret the words differently than you read them in your head. And some of the we used to kick about it, because I don't know of a single Texan who ever used the word scalp to talk about a scalp, but he heard that from somewhere, because it's in there. And I know that he was picking stuff up from other places, because I know I told you about this before, Paul. I don't think I told John. You see it in several of the stories. Whenever somebody's got a handgun, they pint their pistol, P apostrophe INT, right? For point, they use pint. And when you read it, you don't, is it pint or pint? What is this? What does he mean? There is a recording. You guys can YouTube it if you want, featuring Jack Teagarden, one of the preeminent jazz blues trombonists of all time. He is doing a duet with Fats Waller. And it's You Rascal You. I'll be glad when you're dead, you rascal you. Classic call and response. And so there's a part at the end of it. Now Teagarden's from Vernon, Texas. So he is one of us. And he, by the way, was a contemporary of Robert E. Howard. They were born 1 year apart.
Mhm.
So um, in the lyrics, when he's singing, Teagarden says, "Ain't no use to run, you rascal, you." And Fats says, "Why?" And he says, "Ain't no use to run, you rascal." He says, "Why?" He says, "Ain't no use to run. Why? Because I'll pint my pistol at you, son." And my eyebrows shot up when I heard it.
Yeah.
You know, so it's the only place I've ever encountered "pint my pistol."
Mhm.
Um, and I've never seen it anywhere else. I've never seen it written anywhere else. But I do know that Howard had a record player, and he had
Mhm.
records, and he had 78s, and he had radio. And Jack Teagarden would have been on the radio in Texas in the
Mhm.
1920s and 30s.
Yeah.
So I think
So,
that's probably where that came from. It's the only instance I found, and it comes from a Texas singer songwriter.
yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think for him that was about as authentic as it gets. But
I,
but anyways, read them out loud if you get stuck, because it will unlock for you, I think.
that,
Yeah.
that,
You know what
that
you're
would,
not talking about, and I've got a big violent storm about with a big warning box and very bad colors in it about 2 minutes away. So I may lose power and go away here. But the one that a lot of people don't talk about is the last Breck Elkins story.
Yep.
And it's a fascinating story because it starts out with a young guy, some young cowboy guy, goes roaring by Breck, riding his horse, heading up into the mountains. And then here comes Glanton, I guess, trying to stop the kid. And what for? Well, he's going to go hang himself. And Breck's like, well, he's going to go kill himself. Well, it's his business if he wants to kill himself. And he says, no, no, because I got paid this much money to protect this kid, and you got to help me go get him. So, well, I ain't getting paid. And he argues about it for a while. Go, okay, okay, I'll go help you. And they have to figure out how to get the kid down. And the kid's like, well, you can do whatever you want. I'm going to kill myself when I get a chance. And they tie him up and leave him for a while. And then they get into this great chasing a new school teacher who's supposed to be real hot. And Breck wants her to come to his place. And they ride the stagecoach up there. And he says, here, unties him and says, you take care of her till I get done with all these other crazy people. And when he gets back, the young buck is gone. And he went and married the school teacher and is saved. I'm going, gee, who was dating a school teacher,
Yeah.
that was thinking about suicide? It's just like, wow, that is just kind of on the nose.
Yep.
And it was interesting that he got to let Breck be the one to say, what's his own business? He wants to kill himself. I don't, that's not my business. Why should I go stop him? And Gladys like, well, I'm getting paid to stop him. So
Yeah.
like, okay,
I,
well,
I I think it's he owes me $10 or something like
yeah,
that. It was
OV,
like,
yeah,
yeah, I'm,
something
I'm
like
collecting a
that.
debt.
Yeah, it owes
Yeah.
me $10 or something. Yeah. Big
Uh,
reason to stop them. So yeah, and
right.
I remember the first time because that's not in the novel.
No.
I remember the first time I read it, I was like, "What the hell is this?" It was
Mhm.
published after Bob had died, and I was just like, "That is just shocking that to have that story."
If the if the timeline fits with when we know, there was usually about a 3 month lag
Mhm.
between when it got accepted and when it got published, give or take. But
Mhm.
so that had been turned in
Yeah,
when he took his life. I mean, he
yeah,
sent
it's
that in
already
and gotten
gone. Yeah,
paid for it. Yeah. So that was about as close to the actual event as you can get. And I've
yeah,
said before that it's really tempting to make too much hay out of that.
mm,
But while I don't want to make too much hay, you also can't ignore it outright. There's
yeah,
too many similarities. There's too many. Um, you don't even have to squint to see
yeah,
the
yeah,
allegories there. It's
yeah, yeah.
right there, and I can't ever. This is why I go back and forth on that one, because um, in this story, um, I think Robert E. Howard is the guy going up into the mountains. I think
Yeah,
he
of course.
Balthused
Yeah.
himself, and it's interesting that the other two, Breck and Ike, are the ones that are, they have this kind of debate about it, but they generally go along.
Hmm.
And I don't, again, you don't want to say, was this a cry for help? Was he trying to, let people know? I don't think so. I don't think that's it. But
Yeah.
I think maybe he didn't realize that whenever he talked like this in the last 8, 10 years of his life or whenever, that
Yeah.
he was serious. They thought he was kidding. And
Mhm.
I think because that's what they all said. They all said we didn't take any stock by it. I just thought he was talking like he always did. Um, and so yeah, that's an important story. It really is. But like again, we end up having more questions than answers. But
Yeah.
you absolutely, boy, that's so fascinating. It really is.
Well, because it kind of sets up the whole concept. If that school teacher would have just saved me, I wouldn't kill myself.
Yep.
You're like, yeah, that's not good, so
Yeah. Yeah. That's
that's not good. So
no.
it's very different to read that story. And it's one of the other things about the violence in the stories. Breck kind of, Bob kind of bounced around the violence from um tearing up a bunch of people and nobody's dead.
Yeah.
When he fights all his relatives in Warren Bear Creek, nobody's killed. They're all busted up different ways and lose ears or whatever,
Right.
but nobody gets killed. And then you get to one story where now he's mad at the guy and he walks in the bar and he says, "Turn around and draw iron." And the guy turns and starts for his gun and he puts 5 rounds in him or 6 rounds in him instantly, before the guy can get his thing unsleeved and then proceeds to tear the bar apart.
Right.
And um, it was kind of weird that there were times that he acted like, no, I want to make sure nobody gets killed in these stories. And there were times he went, oh yeah, we're going to kill a few people in this story.
Yeah.
And I never quite got a handle on what drove some of that because he had some real bad guys in some of the stories, and he would just catch them. He'd catch them and bring them in, and they'd be half scalped or whatever from him dragging them through the brush or something. It was a funny ending from they're begging for the prison just to get away from Breck, and and so it was kind of different to get the ones where he just walks in and just blows somebody away, and it doesn't happen very often.
It does not, but I'm going to come down on the side of the Texas Rangers axiom on this.
Which
He
is
he killed those guys because they needed killing.
yeah, that's right.
Some
Yeah,
people just need killing.
yeah, some
you
guys
know,
just need killing. Yeah,
that's it.
so. Yeah, I always thought that was kind of interesting because you don't see it very often. It's just
Mm-mm.
really rare. He'll just suddenly go on a story and he'll have one or two that he just suddenly we're just blowing people away.
Right.
Instead of just knocking them out and throwing them through the rain barrel and all the other kind of slapstick stuff, slapstick
Yeah.
violence that a lot of the rest of it is. So that was kind of weird. Anyway, I digress, or I wander off on a tangent.
All right. So do we need to batten down the hatches since
Yeah,
Texas is
I
about
got
to
to
be
go run
flooding?
now and hide. So.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for doing this. And as we said, we'll do this again sometime soon when we talk about Volume 2, which is
mhm.
contains the fix-up novel, The Gent from Bear Creek, which I believe is the first 8 or 9 short stories on Breckinridge Elkins, plus all
Yeah.
the extra stuff that Bob wrote. And then
Mhm.
it contains his 3 Breckinridge Elkins knockoff characters, Bearfield Elston, Buckner J. Grimes, and Pike Bearfield.
Mhm.
Um, both books are available now, as we said, from the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press site, and, excuse me, and Amazon. And anything you guys would like to add or plug?
No, just Paul, I never thanked you for letting me get in on any of that action you were doing early on. I got to write a couple of early introductions for stuff that you were
Mhm.
doing for Wildside, and uh, I've always considered your publishing of the complete action stories really kind of the thing that sort of uh, put me down the path to okay, I need to get more into this because there's a lot of stuff I've not seen and all that. So thank you for those early and continuing efforts. I really appreciate it. I've always have.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I always keep coming back to you because you're actually a really skilled author. So I love to come back and say, I need somebody to write an introduction. Who's going to write one that's not boring? Oh, wait, there's Mark. Hey, Mark, how's it going, man? You know,
Very appreciative. Yes,
I really appreciate that. So it's good we can help each other out. So
absolutely, absolutely. John, thanks for running this. We'll
another fine and fabulous job as always.
we'll get back into it, and also we got boxing stuff to talk
Boxing,
about
yeah.
at another date too. So
And also to mention for everybody, we still are collecting donations for the Robert E. Howard House Repair Fund. If you're interested in donating to the repair fund for the house, 100% of your donation will go to the house repair. We're all volunteers on the board of directors for the foundation, as is Project Pride. And the website for it is rehfoundation.org. And on that page that you go to, they'll say, Save the Robert E. Howard House. Also, if you're interested in joining the Robert E. Howard Foundation, go see our REHF at roberthowardfoundation.org. And we have 3 levels of membership for that. And if you're a member of the foundation, you have just about a week left to vote in this year's Robert E. Howard Awards. And the voting on that will end midnight, March 17th, Texas time, or Central Saving Time.
Whatever.
yes, join at any level.
Damn
yes.
wiggly clocks moving
That's
around.
right.
I don't know. So,
We did have 4 levels of membership, but nobody was actually signing up for the Win a Dream Date with John tier, which I find frankly scandalous, because John's a delight. I don't know.
that's
I don't
right.
know,
That's
I
right.
don't know what the
It
problem was.
just goes to show you how smart our readers and fans are.
That's it.
I
That's
think
it.
$750 is damn reasonable.
Yeah, man. I've blown more for prom dates. We're okay.
But your
man.
dress looked great, baby. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, guys. I got to run.
Gents,
All right,
take
thank you
care.
all so
Always
very
a pleasure.
much. We'll
Everybody
see
be
y'all.
safe.
Y'all too. Take care.
Yeah.